Coming up on DFE News, the peace president strikes again. Trump brokers a new ceasefire between Israel and a sworn enemy. Also, what would you do if a shooter opens fire on your congregation? Security leader Greg Koch explains how churches can protect themselves. And, well, how the turntables. She charged Trump with mortgage fraud. Now the New York Attorney General faces the same indictments. We've got news for you, those stories and more right now on DFE News. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on DFE News, news done right. I'm Jeff Kirk. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, so everyone gets to see DFE News. So much is happening. Let's get right to it. After more than 700 days in captivity, the last of the living Israeli hostages taken prisoner by Hamas are free. As part of the first phase of a larger peace deal between Israel and Hamas, the remaining 20 living hostages held since October 7th, 2023 from a music festival were released Monday and reunited with their families. President Trump personally addressed the Israeli parliament, known as the Knesset, and received a standing ovation for his role in brokering the peace deal. He had this to say.
After 2 harrowing years in darkness and captivity, 20 courageous hostages are returning to the glorious embrace of their families, and it is glorious. 28 more precious loved ones are coming home at last to rest in this sacred soil for all of time. And after so many years of unceasing war and endless danger, today the skies are calm, the guns are silent, the sirens are still, and the sun rises on a holy land that is finally at peace, a land and a region that will live, God willing, in peace for all eternity.
As part of the agreement, Israel is pulling back its forces within Gaza and is set to release nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, 250 of which were under life sentences for committing bombings and murder. Future phases of the peace deal are still under discussion, but include disarming of Hamas and building international cooperation for security and reconstruction of Gaza. Operating on a very tight schedule, President Trump departed the Middle East immediately after his press conference for some very important business back home. On what would have been Charlie Kirk's 32nd birthday, the president held a ceremony at the White House to award Kirk the nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He also designated October 14th as a national day of remembrance for the assassinated Christian and conservative leader. Charlie's widow, Erika, accepted the medal on his behalf and said that Charlie might have one day run for president himself if he had lived. When she asked their daughter what she wants to say to Daddy on his birthday, she said, "Happy birthday, Daddy. I want to give you a stuffed animal, and I want you to eat a cupcake with ice cream." In his remarks, President Trump said that, like Charlie, we must not flinch in the face of darkness and hostility, and we must never waver in speaking the truth with joyful and steadfast resolve. Well, it seems that there's been an alarming number of attacks at places of worship recently, from the synagogue attack in the UK to the LDS Church in Michigan to the shooting at the Catholic school in Minneapolis just weeks ago. It's got a lot of people thinking about what they would do if something happened at their own church. Here to discuss church security is Greg Koch, who has helped out with church security for over 10 years in Colorado. So, Greg, what do you think is really behind this recent uptick in all of these church attacks and shootings?
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me. It's hard to say what motivates people to do these crazy acts of violence, but definitely politics is a piece of it. It's hard to say with any certainty. I mean, there's so many different motivations. The recent ones obviously were political. We saw, with Charlie Kirk and the one, which one was it? A couple days after that, they were writing on the bullets, they were writing political messages and things like that. So, I mean, clearly
anti-ICE or trans something or other. Yeah.
Right. So the deportations, the transgender movement, the political, temperature rising over the last years. It definitely makes a big difference. So,
Yeah. So what's the first thing that goes through your mind when you hear about these types of events, like the shooting at the Catholic school in Minneapolis where children were shot and killed, or the Mormon church in Michigan where a person rammed his truck into the church and then set it on fire and shot people? What are your first thoughts when something like that happens?
well, obviously, first thoughts are just, it's such a tragedy. We don't want to see any stuff like that happening again. But it really makes me think, man, how can we avoid this in any of the locations that I'm at? How can churches and schools and and businesses, for that matter, avoid having, I guess, not just stopping the act, but also trying to think ahead and prevent or plan for any of these crazy circumstances.
Yeah. So as part of that planning, are you of the opinion that every church should have a security team, or at least have some members of the church who are armed?
Well, when you talk about getting armed, then it gets pretty dicey because there's a lot of legal ramifications. I wish I could say that we don't need it, but unfortunately, you know, yeah, every church should at least think about it. Whether it's just people kind of wandering around and keeping an eye on things. We've had at some of my previous safety locations that I was helping with, we were not focused necessarily on security, but just kind of keeping an eye on things and just being around. The biggest deterrent for a lot of these things is just people walking around, keeping an eye on stuff. A lot of these are crimes of opportunity. So, if you've got a big parking lot on a major road, you might have we've had people come by and they just started checking doors to see if they could find some loose change or, a couple bucks in the cup holder. So, if we have somebody walk the parking lot every few minutes, every, 15 minutes or so, or, just kind of keeping an eye on the entrances, things like that. Those are really simple ways that you can keep those crimes of opportunity. And then, when it gets more serious, then it takes more planning and more preparation as far as, planning for an active shooter or things like that. There's a lot more that goes into that.
Yeah, naturally, once you are considering armed security, there's a lot of other considerations that have to be taken into account, such as training. Have you ever had any formal training with regard to maintaining security at a church, or should churches who are considering armed security send their personnel to a training course?
Definitely. Anybody that is considering carrying a weapon at any time should have training. I mean, unfortunately, people think they know more than they do sometimes, especially, there's a lot of guys that grew up, they were hunting as kids, they were carrying shotguns, when they were 12 years old, myself included. And so I was fairly confident around guns, but when you get in a high stress situation, it's an entirely different thing. And you have to train for that. If you just get a guy that says, oh, I can carry a gun, no problem, I know what I'm doing, you really need to vet people like that and make sure they're not just trying to be a hero or something like that. Make sure that they're actually safety minded and know what they're doing out there, and they're not going to cause more trouble or cause more damage by providing somebody else with a gun because they don't know how to keep a hold of it or something like that. So
Yeah, absolutely. It could turn out to be a huge liability.
absolutely.
So what should members of a congregation do if an incident does occur and someone does begin shooting at the church?
Well, ultimately, it depends on how you've been prepared. If there's people there that are willing and able to defend the church and defend the people there, then hopefully they've got the training and they've got liability and liabilities covered, at least personally, and they've thought through the ramifications, because even in a case of self-defense, there's a good chance you're going to jail temporarily. So, I mean, it's a very personal decision if the church hasn't formed a plan. So ultimately, you can't say, what any one person should or shouldn't do, because some people just want nothing to do with it and they take the risk. Other people are like, man, I'm gonna protect my life, my family, my friends. I'm gonna protect them with my life if I have to. As far as the church itself, again, there's a lot of planning and legal ramifications, and so you kind of need to think through that and potentially get an attorney involved.
Yeah, for sure. Greg, how would you respond to those who say that churches should be gun-free zones, or that the people in the church should respond with peace instead of more violence?
Again, I wish we could say that. I wish we could respond with peace, but sometimes that's just not the option. As we saw in the case with the car going through the wall, and peace is kind of out the window at that point. And so it would be great if we could say churches should be gun-free zones, and ideally we keep a low profile so that people aren't thinking about that while they're worshiping or learning, going to school, whatever it is. In an ideal situation, the safety team is mostly unnoticed, so that the parishioners or the students or whatever it is can focus on why they're there. Ideally, the guys or gals that are doing the safety, they can kind of do their thing without people noticing and hopefully keep a low profile. And only when it gets real crazy do they jump in and take action.
So in your experience, do people tend to feel safer when there is some type of security, perhaps armed security or church, or is it more of a distraction for some people?
I think it's a little of both. I've definitely had people come up and say, hey, we love having you standing here by the door. It makes us feel safer so that we don't have to think about it ourselves. On the other hand, if people know that people are carrying guns, whether it's concealed or whatever it is, unless it's an a uniformed officer, some people tend to get nervous, and maybe even if it is an officer. But when you have just church members, you don't know necessarily what their training is unless the church has made it known, which can be good or bad. So there are some people that are just naturally nervous around guns, and that's okay, provided that nothing's happening. They don't need to know they're there. So that's why I say hopefully you can keep a low profile, and the people that are scared or nervous around guns, they don't need to know they're there. The people that are involved, they're ready to take action.
Right. So what is your biggest worry on a Sunday morning at your church?
Well, obviously I've got friends and family there, and so I'm thinking about the safety of, if something happens. So again, I tend to think the more we can just keep watch and make a presence known, that's going to eliminate most of our potential events. Most of these, like I said, are crimes of opportunity. The big ones, that we've seen, a lot of those tend to be more planned, and it's somebody that's been, looking at the property. So if we're keeping an eye out during the week or during the months, on a normal basis, then hopefully, sadly, they're going to choose an easier target, and that might be just down the road from us. So we're not safe necessarily, but we're safer. I mean, you can't prevent every scenario, but you can do the best you can to mitigate the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely good information that our viewers might be able to take back with them to their own congregations. Hopefully, they won't have to use it, but as always, it's better to be prepared than not. Greg, thanks for joining us, and thank you for all your insights.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So sad that we have to prepare for those kinds of attacks. Let's pray the Lord changes the hearts and minds of those who would carry out this kind of terror campaign. The Supreme Court is looking at a redistricting case from Louisiana that could make a big impact on the country as a whole. Nearly 20 Democrat seats in the House could potentially flip to Republicans. The case, Louisiana versus Calais, centers around the intentional creation of a majority Black voting district in Louisiana and how it legally fits with the Voting Rights Act on one side and the 14th and 15th Amendments on the other side. Under the Voting Rights Act, states are not allowed to draw districts to deliberately make the voting power of racial minorities weaker, but the 14th and 15th Amendments prohibit discrimination on the basis of race for legal protection and voting rights. The plaintiffs argue creating a voting district specifically based on race is inconsistent with the letter and spirit of the Constitution, but opponents say the inability to do that will prevent minority populations from being able to elect their preferred candidates. Liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is also under fire for saying minorities are disabled because they don't have equal access to the voting system in the same way that wheelchair users faced voting sites with stairs before the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. The outcome of the case will have impact well beyond just Louisiana, and its effect on nationwide redistricting rules could result in a gain of 19 Republican seats in the House. Well, after years of lawfare against President Trump, it appears the shoe is on the other foot. A federal grand jury indicts New York Attorney General Letitia James on mortgage fraud charges. James, who ran for office on a platform of Get Trump, brought charges against the president of making false claims regarding the value of his Mar-a-Lago property in order to get more favorable loan rates. But the Justice Department has charged James, and a federal grand jury has indicted her in the state of Virginia for charges including bank fraud and making false statements to a financial institution. Filmmaker and journalist Joel Gilbert outlined the findings on Real America's Voice.
Tish James probably should not have been charging Donald Trump with trumped-up charges of mortgage fraud in New York, given the fact that New York is a public record state and that all of her mortgages for 43 years were online for myself or anybody else to pull up. And what I found is a pattern of mortgage fraud going all the way back to 1983 when she was only 24 years old. She purchased her first home with her father, claiming that her father was her husband. They purchased it as husband and wife in order to help Letitia qualify for a mortgage that she was not entitled to. Letitia continued this pattern of mortgage fraud with her building in Brooklyn. She bought a 4-story, 5-unit apartment building. And for 24 years, she told the banks it was either 4 units or 1 unit, even though the certificate of occupancy for the building said it was 5 units. Meanwhile, she bought 3 homes in the state of Virginia where her mother was from. Every one of those 3 homes, there's mortgage fraud. She buys a foreclosure with her aunt, and then she doesn't appear on the deed, which is illegal. She buys a house at Sterling Avenue in Norfolk, Virginia, and she explicitly says, I bought this for my niece's children to make us think that, she's trying to help little kids. Well, her niece's 2 children are adult convicted felons. One of them is an absconder from justice with an arrest warrant out in North Carolina. So Letitia bought the property specifically to harbor a fugitive. Now, on that property, my colleague Sam Antar pointed out that Letitia claimed that would be her primary residence. It was actually rejected by the bank 9 times. They would not approve the loan. The 10th time, Letitia says, that's going to be my primary residence. It gets approved, and that was illegal because she got the mortgage and lower interest rates because she'd be the primary resident. The indictment by Ms. Halligan yesterday revolves around the 3rd property on Perone Avenue. And on that property, she took out a specialized loan that specifically said Letitia had to either live there or use it as a second residence. She was not allowed to rent it out. Sure enough, Letitia simply rented it out. So that was really the opening shot because that's the smallest, it's bank fraud charges with 30 years in prison for bank fraud. But I believe and my sources tell me there's more indictments coming. This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Letitia James now joins former FBI Director James Comey and former National Security Advisor John Bolton on the receiving end of the law for possibly committing crimes while going after Donald Trump. For our final story, has anyone ever TP'd your house? How did it make you feel? One recent victim had a reaction you might not expect. I didn't know that TPing houses was still a thing, but in a video making the rounds on social media, a man addresses the kids who did a job on his house, but he wasn't angry. Take a look.
To the 3 young men that did this last night, I have to say, as I was watching this take place, my heart swelled with pride that maybe there's hope for your generation yet. Because this kind of stuff has got Gen X written all over it. But what really got me excited that you did it, despite the trail camera right here. You did it anyway. And my heart swelled with pride as I viewed your beautiful work, looking at my cell phone and thinking, I am proud of those 3 young men. There's hope for your generation after all, because this is Gen X made over.
I think I was in high school the last time my house got TP'd, and it turned out to be the night before my older sister's wedding. Our parents were not nearly as pleased as this gentleman. Well, that's it for now. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, comments, and engage with us so that YouTube and all the socials push it out to more viewers. If you're interested in becoming a DFE sponsor, you can click on the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen. Thanks for watching DFE News. News done right. See you next time.